last week we had another professor from the College of Education and Health Professions, Jay Green, who dazzled us with conversation about BS. This week, we're very honored to have, also from the College of Education and Health Professions, from the health profession side, Professor Michelle Gray, who is an expert researcher in exercise science, who will be offering an Honors College Signature Seminar in the spring on aging. And next week, 2 weeks from now, we will have our sneak preview of our final signature seminar, Brain and Music, taught by Professor Lisa Margulis of Music Theory and Chancellor Joe Steinmetz of Neuroscience. But I'm very excited to introduce one of the hardest working women at the University of Arkansas. I mean, look at this. In addition to having tenure and international and national reputation in research, she's running 3 programs. It's a little manic, don't you think, Dr. Gray?
I agree.
Besides from being an awesome honors director, who's really taken the College of Education and Health Professions honors program and totally done an uplift of it. A wonderful colleague for the Honors College. Yeah, she's amazing, right? As students testify. Also running the Exercise Science Research Center and the Office for Studies on Aging. And still has time to show up on KU. I don't know if you heard Michelle's interview with Kai Elms. If not, go listen to it. Professor Gray was on Ozarks at Large and did a beautiful job. And yes, you sounded great. You know, everybody, when they hear themselves on the radio or hear their voice, they always think horror. But it's an awesome interview. But you have time to come here and give us a sneak preview of what will be a brilliant 3-hour honors seminar. And if you're interested, students, you have till October 25th to apply. We don't make people apply to keep people out, but we want co-hep students sitting with biomedical engineers, sitting with people that do physics, sitting with people that do business, et cetera, because that's who the Honors College is. But I'm really excited because we have a wonderful interdisciplinary-minded faculty member here who's interested in the economics of aging, and basically injustice and aging, the biomechanics of aging, with a specialty in how older folks lose muscle mass, and who is very interested in working with aging populations, or you don't like the word age, seasoned populations. So on that note, I turn it over to my colleague and all-around University of Arkansas rock star, Michelle Gray.
I think I can probably just go home. Don't you agree? Thanks,
No,
Dean Kuhn. I
no, you
really
can't go
appreciate it. I realize we're Facebook Living. That's a little intimidating, just so you know. I do move around. I apologize for the folks out there if I move out of view. But like Dean Kuhn said, I do wear a couple of different hats on this campus, and I blame one of my mentors for that. And she didn't tell me to say no nearly enough. And I appreciate you being here, Dr. Gabrezzo. Thanks for coming. Actually, I have 2 great mentors in the room. Dr. Fort, thank you for being here as well. I appreciate that. These 2 women taught me nearly everything I know. So if I screw it up, just turn around and blame them. Okay? So I work with older adults. We're going to be talking about older adults throughout today's preview, but also next semester as well. And if you're in my class, like Michaela happens to be this semester, she knows I talk about older adults nearly every class period, even though it doesn't relate to the topic at hand. I just can't help it. Their passion, I really love the population, number 1. Number 2, I am 10 hours in a car from my family, and I grew up with all 4 of my grandparents. They were living until I was 38 years of age, and that was a beautiful time in my life to have those interactions with those older adults, my family. But when I came here, I didn't have those older adults to be my family, so I sort of adopted them in retirement communities here around campus or here around town. One particular man, I really love this graphic. There's a retired man at Butterfield Trail, and every time I see him, I say, "Mr. So-and-so, how are you?" And he said, growing older is not for sissies. And he says that every single time. And I say, Mr. So-and-so, what's going on? Well, he fell and did this and that and whatnot. But aging certainly is the ultimate extreme sport. And hopefully I'll talk about what we can do as a society, number one, or what you can do as an individual to help yourself and prepare yourself for those golden years, as we like to call them. We have to get through some data. I'm a data person. I will try to keep it to a minimum as much as I can. But we are growing older as a society, and I think this one particular slide does a great job of representing that. We can look here on the x-axis. We begin in 1900. We go all the way to 2050, and the estimation is actually projected to 2060 these days, and I'll bring up some of those numbers here in a second. But the blue line represents individuals that are 65 years and older, and the green line represents, I guess it's green, represents individuals that are 85 years and older. So what's going on? Treat you just like I treat my class, right, Michaela? Yeah. What is going on? Explain that graph to them.
After 65, they're probably not doing anything anymore. Becoming sedentary.
They're not doing anything anymore. I think the people that are over 65 in this room would disagree with that. Okay? I think they would disagree with that. So number one, the number of older adults, the proportion of older adults is going up dramatically. Okay? It's gone up 1,200% since 1900. So in 110 years, it is increased by 12-fold. The reason is, or the question is why? And I think if I could answer that question 100% and know beyond a shadow of a doubt, I wouldn't be here. I'd probably be somewhere else in my life. But what we need to think about is the number more that is going to increase. Okay, it's going to more than double from 2010 to 2050, and the projection is actually 93.5 million older adults by 2060, if we could extend that line out just a little bit. So society is growing older as well. So what does that mean for you and I? Well, if we go to the next slide, we look at what's called the population pyramid. And on the left, this is representative of 1960. The blue represents men, this orange or red represents women. Same thing over here, but this is a projection for 2060. It looks like a pyramid on the left. I think they probably need to change the name of that from a population pyramid to a population rectangle. Because it's not happening, the projections and what's happening in reality, okay, is not the same as what was going on in 1960. Why do you think that's the case? Sure, go ahead.
Advancing medicine for the most part.
Absolutely, advances in medicine. Everybody watch out.
Oh, good gosh.
Okay, and I can throw it. Okay? Advances in medicine, absolutely. We're not dying from infectious diseases like we were years ago, right? We're not dying from the flu by and large. Okay, we're surviving birth. Okay, birth rates are higher than they've ever been. Okay, also we're waiting longer to have children in our lives. Okay, and as a society, we're having fewer children than replaces the population that's actually deceasing every year. I think the number is about 2.1. So everyone in this room should have 2.1 children in order to replace the folks that are dying. Okay, so keep that in mind as you move throughout your life, if you didn't know that. So I love giving these talks on something that's really, really broad. Something that's really, really broad. I like to pull out the definitions. So if you apply for this particular class, one of the questions is, what is aging? Please do not copy down what's on this slide and regurgitate that. I want something maybe a little more thoughtful, or a little more philosophical. So what is aging? Anytime I bring up a definition, I like to go where the students go, and that's Google. Okay? I asked them something in class the other day, and how would they find this information out? It took 15 minutes for them to say Google it. Okay? I was so surprised. Okay? So Google Dictionary defines aging as the process of growing old. I hate that definition. What does that tell you? It tells me nothing. It has another definition. I didn't like it, so I just kept going down. The process of change in the properties of a material occurring over a period, either with spontaneous or deliberate change. Okay, so spontaneous is just going to happen because I'm growing older. Okay, or deliberate change, it's happening because I have developed Alzheimer's disease or cardiovascular disease. And I didn't do this on purpose necessarily, but because of these diseases, we're seeing these deleterious changes. And then Flatten colleagues in 2012, this was in an NIH, National Institutes of Health manuscript. They define age as age-dependent decline or deterioration of physiological function. Well, that's nice and positive, isn't it? I wanted to go one more level because I grew up in an era where you had an actual dictionary, and it was Merriam-Webster. That was the only dictionary that I'd ever used. For those of you that don't have as many gray hair as me, you might not know that these come in paper form as well. So it's not only Google. Merriam-Webster defines aging as the gradual change in an organism that leads to increased weakness, disease, and death. How about positive, right? It takes place in a cell, an organ, or the total organism, so the whole body, over the entire adult lifespan of any living thing, so regardless of humans or not. There's a decline in biological functions, that's nice and positive too, and inability to adapt to metabolic stress. Okay, that's amazing. Changes in organs includes the replacement of functional cardiovascular cells with fibrous tissue, so maybe leading to cardiovascular disease there. Overall effects include reduced immunity, so we get sick more often, loss of muscular strength, I'm now weak, decline in memory, what did you just say? And other aspects of cognition, and the loss of color in the hair, okay, and elasticity in the skin. I have gone through some of those personal aging changes myself. But I really like the definitions, and those were relatively negative definitions, right? We're leading to an increase in physical dysfunction and death. Okay, so the end of aging is death. And in fact, I ask my students all the time, or they come into the lab and we do this simulated aging project, and they always say, I don't want to grow old. Well, what's the alternative? You die young. I'm not sure that's a positive choice either. But over the course of the last few years, I've done a couple of different projects related to ageism. Okay, does anyone know what ageism is? That's okay. These people do that in my class too. Yeah.
Discrimination based on age.
Discrimination based on age? Absolutely. You think I can get this to you?
Yeah, I think you can. I'm not sure about my flashing.
Boom!
2 for 2. Okay? So I asked students in my class to fill out this scale. It's called the ASD, the Aging Semantic Differential Scale. Okay? And it's a measure of ageism. It's your attitudes toward older adults. And the scale ranges from 24 to 128. So the lowest score, the most positive score, is a low score, which is 24. And the most negative is 168. So this is a paper we published, in 2013. And you can see, it doesn't matter that there are 2 groups here. I'm more than happy to explain those, but that's not really the point. You can see that by and large, folks that have never worked with an individual, okay, the blue line, never worked with an individual over the age of 65, have relatively negative views toward older adults. Make sense? And it goes the other way. Did you know that? That older folks that have never worked with young adults have pretty negative views of you. Believe it or not. Can you believe they would be so ageist? I can't either. So I surveyed most of my students on campus. I went back and pulled some numbers. So these are from 2013 when I was at a previous university. I asked every one of my students that are in my aging-related classes to do this ASD scale, and by and large they're about the same. So somewhere around 75 to 80, which is pretty negative. So I also go through an exercise with most of my students because I want them maybe to think about an older adult. Okay, I just want you to do this for a second. Everybody close their eyes. I want you to picture an older adult. Any older adult, someone you may know or someone you may not know. And just think about in your head one descriptor of that older adult. Now open your eyes. Does anyone care to share? No?
Why? Oh, I'll share.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of like a wise and serene person.
Of course you would, Dr. Bowen. Of course you would. You don't get one of those, mainly because you're holding an infant. Okay?
I thought of someone active. They're like 20 years older than me, and I'm not young, and he's still riding a bicycle. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the adults in the room maybe have a different view of older folks than my 18 to 22-year-olds do in my classes. Most of the time, I think they picture someone like this on the right. has a few more wrinkles, that has a few more gray hairs. And I'll be honest, I fill up the board in my classes with these adjectives, and there's usually one or two positive attributes. And the majority of them, they're not bad, but they're not necessarily positive either. I don't think anyone wants to be described as having wrinkles, right? Or a loss of elasticity of the skin, if we want to go back to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. They also talk about personality characteristics. So if we talk about the personality characteristic of an older adult, what might you think my young adults say?
Grumpy.
Yeah, pretty much grumpy, okay? They're crabby, they're set in their ways, okay? The older adults, it goes the other way too. There's some reverse ageism going on. They have some very negative views of the younger folks too. So now I want you to think about someone, two older adults that are the same age, but maybe have very, very different physical function levels. So one person might be frail and one person might not be frail, okay? Well, I think we can probably all think of folks that run marathons in their 60s or their 70s or their 80s. And then we can compare those individuals to someone else that's relatively frail in their 60s or 70s or 80s. Right now, what I want you to think about is why are there differences between those two populations? What is the underlying cause of someone having physical frailty when they're 65 and someone running a marathon or riding a 100-mile bike ride or whatnot when they're 65? I don't think we're going to be able to answer that necessarily tonight, but I'm going to try to convince you that it's physical activity and exercise as much as I can. And you saw that I'm a professor of exercise science. I will be biased 100% toward physical activity and exercise, but hopefully I can convince you that the literature supports that as well. These folks, this picture was taken in 2015. These folks are my grandparents. So these are my mother's parents. This is my grandmother on the left, well, you knew that, right? Grandfather on the right. Grandmother, unfortunately, passed from Alzheimer's disease. She had congestive heart failure and Alzheimer's disease, and grandfather's still alive. He's 81 years old. Are these folks old? Yeah, absolutely. My grandpa would tell you he's old. Now, if you talk to grandmother when she was living, there's no way. She was pretty combative toward the end, for sure. Is this woman old? What's the difference between my grandmother that had Alzheimer's disease at 77, this woman in this picture? How old do you think she is? What's the guess?
72.
72. Anybody else?
50.
No, I think she's
50. She looks 50 in my opinion. I mean, yeah. She's 82 years of age.
Okay.
82 in that picture. Oh, that was mine. 82 years of age. And her shirt, I can't read it up here, it says, determined, dedicated, and disciplined to be fit. How long do you think she was exercising? When do you think she started exercising? In her younger years? Middle-aged, which I'm not sure how to define these days.
75.
75. Not quite.
Something she starts.
Yeah, so you know this woman. Yeah, what's her name?
I knew that. I can't remember.
Ernestine Shepherd.
Yeah.
Ernestine, yeah. She started exercising when she was 56 years of age with her sister. They started doing aerobic type activities, walking and running and probably some cycling. Unfortunately, her sister passed, I think, from cancer, and she gave it up. And one of her family friends said, you know what, your sister wouldn't want you to give this up. She started resistance training, which is how you get those big muscles, in her 70s. Ooh. So what's the difference between my grandmother and this woman? Some genetics, there's always going to be a genetic predisposition for one thing or the other. But definitely being determined and disciplined to be fit are some of those attributes that I think contribute to that. Anybody know this woman? No? No?
I think the story was she swam in the Olympics and she had like 4 kids. Is that right? Or
I'm not sure if she had any kids. She probably did. I only know her age. In this picture was taken in 2008 at the Olympic Games. She was 41 years of age. Okay, 41 years of age. And I have a little story about her. I couldn't quite commit all of this to memory. She was born in 1967. This is Dara Torres, just in case you didn't know. She swam in her first Olympic Games in 1984. The students in the room probably weren't even born. Okay, and her last Olympic Games was in 2008 when this picture was taken. She was 41 years of age. She won 3 silver medals that year and was just 1/100th of a second away from gold in the 50 meter freestyle. Okay, she competed against women that ranged from 16 to 25 years her junior and nearly beat them all. Isn't that amazing? So would you call her old? Hopefully not. I'm really close to 41. Okay, and then this woman, you may or may not know, she broke the world record for the marathon for 90-plus-year-olds. Amazing, don't you think? Her name's Harriet Thompson. Unfortunately, she passed away when she was 94. She was 91 in this particular picture. She passed away because she died from complications of a fall. And you're like, well, old folks fall, right? No, she was delivering Christmas gifts to a senior center and unfortunately tripped and fell down the stairs. It's a horrible situation, a horrible story. But this is, her name's Harriet Thompson. This picture was taken in June of 2015. She completed her first marathon then, and she finished in a time of 7 hours and 7 minutes, which is a 16:32 pace. The woman that won that particular race ran it, I think, in 6:32 pace. Okay, 16:30 and 6:32. She broke the previous world record by 1 hour and 46 minutes. When do you think she started running? Her whole life? In her 50s. She started running 5K distances with her husband. When her husband passed from complications related to cancer or cancer, she started running longer distances and completed her first marathon when she was 76 years of age. So does it matter when you start? I don't think so. But going back to that question of why, what makes someone able to run a marathon when they're 91 and I can't run one when I'm 40? Genetics, you would say. I'll agree. Discipline. Yeah, I don't really have the discipline for that long distance anymore. But definitely, I think it's a lifetime of physical activity and physical fitness. And I'm going to try to convince you that even though there are age-related changes in the way our body functions and the way that our body works, we can still hang on to some of those things throughout our entire life. This is a little scientific, and I apologize for those of you that really hate this type of stuff. But this is a really great article. It was published in the Journal of Applied Physiology in 2006. And the very first sentence in this article says, normal aging, which I love. What in the world is normal aging? Okay. Normal aging in humans is characterized by muscular atrophy and a loss of force-generating capacity. And for the non-scientists in the room, muscle atrophy means muscle wasting, so your muscles get smaller if you don't use them, or related to age, and a loss of force-generating capacity, meaning you get weaker. Okay, those are fancy terms there. Here we're looking at muscle biopsies. So they go in with a little knife, okay, and they take out a bit of the muscle, and then they smash it up and put it on under a microscope, and this is what you see. The dark stain are fast-twitch muscle fibers. Those are the muscle fibers that we use when we sprint, when we're going really quickly. And the white ones are the slow-twitch muscle fibers that we're using right now just to not fall out of our chair or when we're walking a long, slow distance. On the left, this graph represents an individual that's 26 years of age. On the right, this represents an individual that's 71 years of age. Even though you're not trained to read these muscle biopsies, you can see that the size of the muscle fibers, both for the fast twitch, those dark stained, and the slow twitch, the light stained, get smaller. So the individual muscle fibers get smaller. These are like threads, okay, that make up the giant muscles. If something gets smaller, it loses its ability to produce force. Okay, so that means because these guys are getting smaller, we reduce the ability to produce force, and it goes down by about 1% per year, or about 10% per decade. What I didn't tell you is the reason it was called normal aging, or it says normal aging at the top, is these guys, the 70-year-olds and older, and the 26-year-olds about, it was like 20 to 33, I think was the young group, and this group went up to 84 years of age. They were all sprinters. I don't know who chooses to sprint in their 70s. Because the last time I did it, I had a coach yelling at me, making me do it. It's not fun. I don't really like to do it. Okay, so these people were sprinters, and they were continuing to compete through their entire life. I really love this slide, and I love it for a couple of different reasons. Number one, I think it's really easy to look at and kind of figure out what you're looking at with a little bit of explanation, okay? But we have changes in body composition. I just told you that the muscle fibers themselves get smaller, which is true, but the whole muscle gets smaller as well. So we're looking at an individual on the left. This is a 25-year-old male and an 81-year-old male on the right. This big white thing there in the middle, that's the femur. So we're looking at the lower leg, okay, or the thigh, and it's a cross-sectional area. So if you were to take the thigh and cut it right in half and look down on it, that's what we're looking at. This part here that's a light gray, that represents muscle. There's a tiny, I know it's hard to see in the back, but there's a tiny thin gray line all the way around. That's your skin. And the black part that's between that little thin line and the gray part, that's fat. Okay? You can see a difference between the left and the right side of the young and the old male, right? What do you see? More fat and less muscle. What I see is a bunch of marbling, which if it were a steak, it would be beautiful, but this is a human. Okay? A bunch of marbling, the fat inside the muscle. That's called intramuscular fat, or the fat inside the muscle. So fat's really non-functioning. So the more fat we have, just we're softer, surely, but that doesn't function. That doesn't generate force or help us move like muscle mass does. Okay? You should know that this was a sedentary older adult. It was not an exercising older adult. So those changes, though, in lean tissue mass or muscle mass lead to some other changes as well. This particular graph represents aerobic performance or aerobic capacity. And I get it, you don't know what that is. This represents the ability to move around for a long period of time. To walk, it is definitely representative of an individual's ability to perform their activities of daily living. If your VO2, which is represented here on the y-axis, is too low, you just can't do things. You can't go grocery shopping, you can't make your own bed, so forth and so on, because your capacity is too low. There are three lines up here. The top line represents folks that are endurance trained. So they still race, they still compete, okay? And we're looking at folks, they didn't really start when they were 10, but the line goes from 10 to 90 years of age. And it starts at about 20, that's when folks were actually tested, and then ends somewhere in the 80s, but primarily in the 70s. So those folks are endurance trained. The middle line represents folks that are physically active. I would consider myself to be physically active. I'm not a competitor, number one, but I do perform physical activity on a regular basis, okay? And then the sedentary folks truly avoid exercise and physical activity at all costs. Those are the folks that circle Walmart parking lot to try to get the very first parking spot, which drives me bonkers, just so you know. I love it when I'm being chased in the parking lot to go to my car, but I'm in the back 40, so they never want my parking space. So these folks are sedentary. Okay? This is very telling. I love this particular graph because those folks that wind up here on this particular graph, okay, are somewhere, for the sedentary folks, they have the same VO2, the same aerobic capacity of a sedentary person in their 50s. 40 years their junior. I think that's pretty telling. And the folks that are physically active in their 90s still have the VO2 max of someone that was completely sedentary in their 20s. You could say, I don't think it would be smart to say it, but you could say that it takes 40 years off of your life. Okay? I don't think that's true because we're not talking about longevity. We're talking about the ability to perform activities of daily living. But you can still perform those things for a very long time or for a longer period of time. For the neuroscientists in the room, you're really going to love this, or at least I think you're going to love it, because I do. Reaction time. Reaction time is really important for older adults. On the left, we're talking about simple reaction time, and on the right, it's choice reaction time. And simple reaction time, that graph on the left, starts out at 20, ends up at 75. By and large, doesn't change a lot. It pretty much stays the same. But that graph on the right, when we make decisions, we are making choices. Okay, it's usually not a go, no go, even if it's a red light, green light situation. Right? How do you make a decision? The light goes from green to orange. How do you know if you're going to speed up or slow down? It depends on a bunch of different factors, right? How far are you away from the intersection? Are there a bunch of cars behind you? Is there a cop sitting at the intersection? Maybe that would change your mind. So by and large, we are making choice reaction time. When we make a decision, we're making quickly. It is definitely a choice, and it's not just a simple no go reaction. And the difference here, it goes from about 0.45 up to about 0.75. Okay? Think about this. You're driving your car at 60 miles an hour, and a toddler goes into the street. Hopefully you're not driving through my neighborhood at 60 miles per hour. What do? Do you swerve or do you slam on the brakes? That's choice reaction time. Okay? Someone that's physically active can make that decision. I wrote it down. 0.24 seconds faster than someone that's physically inactive. So it's not only going on up here, but it's also, those changes are taking effect in the brain as well. And all of the synapses from the top to the bottom just happen quicker. So what happens? When you make that decision to stop, and you're going 60 miles an hour, how fast do you think you're going to stop? Okay, you're going to make that decision, and you're going to stop 12 feet before if you were physically inactive. So between the physically active and the physically inactive folks, the physically active folks will stop 12 feet sooner than the physically inactive folks. Here's the question. If it truly was a toddler, you would miss them. You would stop before you hit them in a standard length car, okay, traveling 60 miles an hour if you're physically active. Unfortunately, you're going to run over them, which is a horrible thing to think about, if you're physically inactive. So hopefully, just because of that, you will decide to be physically active, or maybe slow down when you're going through a neighborhood. So what can you do to change all of this? I've already told you the answer. You're going to exercise, right? You're going to exercise, you're going to start being physically active. Absolutely, I would agree with you 100%. It's not going to change all of those negative age-related changes, though. Okay, but hopefully it's going to slow them down. We're going to change the trajectory. I really like this particular graphic. It comes out of a textbook that I use in my physical dimensions of aging class. And it aligns with my particular research agenda. And that's working with older adults, usually through exercise, usually through specifically resistive type exercises to improve physical function. I want older adults to be able to stay in their homes for as long as they choose. Sometimes they choose to go somewhere else to live, and that's fine. But I want them to have the ability and the opportunity to make the choice, and we don't make that choice for them. But by and large, statistically speaking, 10% of community-dwelling older adults lose their physical function every year. Okay, I'm going to go backwards just 1 second because I really want to point out why I'm bringing this up. Okay, so healthy aging definitely is at the intersection of physical function, enjoying life, which I think probably is a definite or a given, mental function, and avoiding diseases. Get your flu shot. Okay, let's try there. Number one, let's not get cardiovascular disease. But then the enjoyment of life, I think, is very important as well. Okay, so how do we train ourselves to improve or maintain our physical function? And you think you've already seen this slide before, but I don't think you have. Okay, this particular study, it was published in 2011. They looked at masters athletes. Does anyone know what a masters athlete is? It's someone that performs beyond their peak. Okay, beyond their peak. So a masters gymnast, maybe 25. It's kind of hard to believe, but they reach their peak early in their life. A masters swimmer, maybe later. It's usually about 40. Jared Torres was much better beyond that particular span. So these are masters athletes. One of them is young, and 2 of them are old. If I hadn't told you that, would you think that 2 of them were young and 1 of them was old? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because these two, hopefully you agree with me, that the top one and the bottom one look similar. Do you agree? Okay, and the one in the middle looks very similar to that previous one, the 81-year-old, right? But this one at the top is a 40-year-old triathlete. This is a sedentary male, and this is a 70-year-old triathlete. So what can we do to stave off decreases in physical function? I don't think you have to be a triathlete, okay? That's not what I'm saying. But any type of movement helps and will certainly help maintain your physical function for a longer period of time. A few years ago, I was watching 60 Minutes. Is anybody familiar with that new show? No? You're laughing because everyone is? I didn't know, okay? And I forget that lady's name, the host. Does anybody know? Leslie
Stahl.
Stahl?
No, Diana Sawyer.
No,
That's not Diana Sawyer.
It doesn't matter.
Diane Reed. I don't know.
So this lady right here, I was watching 60 Minutes, and they started talking about older adults. I thought, what in the world's going on? No one ever talks about older adults. The only one you ever hear about is Betty White. Okay? In a couple of different Super Bowl commercials. And she was doing this report on 60 Minutes, and you know 60 Minutes is broken down usually into 3 segments, 3 20-minute segments. They took 2 segments, so 40 minutes of this 60-minute show was related to highlighting the reports and the results from this one study, and the study is called the 90-plus study. In order to be in the study now, you have to be 90-plus years of age. They started studying folks when they were 55 and 65. And these were folks that lived in one retirement community, a little different than the retirement communities that we have here in Northwest Arkansas. It was truly like a community. It looked like a neighborhood. It didn't look like a campus like some of those look today here in Northwest Arkansas. It had a grocery store, it had a medical clinic, it had everything that you could ever want. It was a true community. You just had to be over, I think it was over 55 in order to move there in the first place. So a group of researchers from the University of California at Irvine came into this retirement community and said, we want to study you folks. We want to know why some people die at 70 and some people die at 90, and why some people have these issues at 70 and these other people don't have these issues at 70. So they came in, they do blood work, they do cognitive tests, all sorts of tests. They do physical function tests. They do a treadmill test to see how their heart is going to respond to exercise and physical activity. They do everything that you could ever imagine, and they have to have at least one MRI on the head, on the brain. Okay? They found, after years and years and years, and I think when this aired several years ago, that it was about 35 years in the making. They had studied these folks either once every 6 months, once every 12 months, or once every 24 months. It really depended on the patient. So these physicians and researchers would come in, they would do all of these assessments, and the end goal, this particular program, was looking at why folks got Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so that was their outcome measure. Why did they get Alzheimer's disease? Why did some people not get Alzheimer's disease? And could we pinpoint the reason? Was it, I take a calcium supplement, is that why? Vitamin E, vitamin D, B12, okay, because I don't eat meat, because I do eat meat, because I'm vegan, because I'm vegetarian, everything. They looked at the socioeconomic aspect, they looked at everything you could think of. And what do you think was the one contributing factor to not getting Alzheimer's disease? Come on, I've thrown it out there. It was. I only have one left. Who said that? Woo! Yes! Almost hit her in the head. Whoops. You can keep it. Okay? It was physical activity. They asked what type of physical activity they did. What do you think it was? What was the most important physical activity for them to do? Walking, resistance training. I wish it had been resistance training. No?
Dancing.
Cycling. I wish it had been cycling. That wasn't it.
Dancing.
Dancing. I wish it would have been dancing.
Just movement.
I wish it would have been everything. What is it?
I said movement.
Just movement. That's the answer. That's the right answer.
Okay.
It didn't matter. It didn't matter if it was gardening. It didn't matter if it was cycling. It didn't matter if it was fill in the blank with your favorite thing to do. It was movement. And there was a floor and a ceiling effect. Okay? It was a dose response. Those individuals were protected from Alzheimer's disease if they performed at least 15 minutes of physical activity, movement, every day, 7 days a week. And there was a ceiling effect. How many hours do you think it took to reach the ceiling effect?
30
30 hours or 30 minutes?
minutes.
45.
Is that all?
I was surprised. 45 minutes, you reached the top. So if there's one thing you take away today, I hope it's that you exercise, you are physically active 7 days a week for a minimum of 15 minutes. Okay? And based on everything I've said, I would like to go through a few myths and then a few truths, just to piggyback off of Jay Green's BS lectures the other day. Okay? Here's a myth. Aging begins at 65. Absolutely not. Aging begins now. We are aging. I am aging, you're aging, everyone's aging, whether we like it or not. And again, my take is it's better than the alternative. Old age is not a disease, okay? Or maturity is not a disease, or being seasoned is not a disease. It brings on mental impairment. Definitely cognitive impairment and age-related changes in cognition are something we should be talking about. But just because we reach 75 or 85 or 95 years of age does not mean that our mental faculties have decreased in the least. There are homogeneous physiological declines among all older adults, and homogeneous just means everyone declines at the same rate, or those declines will be similar in any regard. That is not the case whatsoever. I'm going to show you another photo of my grandparent here in a second, and I'll talk to you about why that's important. Older adults are poor and powerless. I hate it when my students say things like that and I write it on the board because I just parrot what they say. Okay, close your eyes, think of an older adult. They don't have any money. That's not true. Or they say they're on a fixed income is really what they're saying. You and I are going to have the same issues as our parents and grandparents. Now, while I look a lot like my mom, I think we will probably have different age-related experiences just because of the two lives that we've led our entire life. Some of the truths. Good health during your young years, your years right now, is a forerunner to good health in old age. That's true. We need to start implementing those habits. I'll talk about physical activity a lot. I'll say it again. Implement those things now. Those are the changes that we need to be making. Considerable advances have been made in preventing chronic illnesses. We talked about that earlier, the young man in the middle. Quality of life depends on biomedical, socioeconomic, and cultural factors, and all of those play a role in healthy aging. I don't think one is any more important than the other. And the negative images of older adults can be omitted through education. Okay, I've been working with ageism for a while. We are ageist. Older adults are ageist. Look at that old man over there. Okay, look at that old woman over there. We talk about it all the time. It's really rampant in the car. I just had this conversation about an hour ago. Come on, Grandpa, get out of the way. I'm usually the one driving like that, just so you know. I do drive under the speed limit most of the time. So with that, I do want to thank you for coming out here. I really appreciate it. I do want to highlight this person in this photo. Has anyone ever worked on a farm before? You got a handful, okay? This is my family farm. This is the patriarch of the farm. This is my grandpa. His name is Corky, and I've called him Corky his entire life. He's 91 years old. He was 91 years old in this picture, and he's throwing square bales of hay up onto that trailer. Has anyone ever done that for work? Is it an easy task? It's the worst.
Lightweight bale. Looks like a 90-pound.
Those are pretty big. Yeah, those are pretty big, and those are pretty. They're pretty tightly bound for sure. What makes you think? Why do you think he's able to do this?
Because he always did.
He's always done it, and he's never stopped. Okay, and I think that is part of the reason that he's able to do that today. So I want to thank you very much. I want to open it up for questions. I'll be here as long as you want, and thank you.
I have a question. Yeah, I'm Roger. Sorry for the question. So when you're talking about, there's 15 minutes is like the basement, 45 minutes. Is there a point where, like, if they do too much that it starts to decline, or if there's maximal benefit at 45 minutes?
Yeah, so in that particular study, they were only looking at Alzheimer's disease, and the maximal benefit was 45 minutes a day. Keep in mind that they were looking at the outcome variable in folks that were 90 years of age and older. So they weren't really looking at folks that were 65 years of age and older. Do I think that more than 45 minutes is beneficial? Yes, but too much of a good thing becomes a bad thing, right?
Right.
And it's really hard to define what is too much for an individual. I think it depends on a lot of different factors. For me, it's when I get up to running more than 30 miles a week, I start to injure myself. I think those are some of the age-related negative changes that I've experienced, but I can cycle many more miles than I can run. So I think having an individual that is skilled in programming, exercise programming for older adults, is really beneficial and I think needed in this country. I don't think most people know how to work with older adults. Yes, ma'am.
So I think the demographics of the people that are turning 70 right now, baby boomers, I think, are going to change how we think about aging, and maybe some of these studies will need to be redone.
I hope so.
Because the baby boomers have more money, they have more education, and they're resisting the stereotypes and
Yes.
And we're better looking.
I agree 100%, and I hope we continue to have those conversations, definitely in the research community, and continue to develop these. Again, I'm an exercise physiologist, you know this, Susan. Develop these exercise programs that are more tailored to the population at hand. We can't do what we did 15 years ago and expect better results. Right? We have to make sure that we're changing our research methodology to fit the population at hand. So I agree with you 100%.
I think, you know, what they say about the baby boomers, we grew up chanting, hell no, I won't go. So we just continue.
It's going to happen,
chant
right? Yes. Yeah.
Well,
my mom's in that category, so I'm not sure I'm looking forward to that necessarily.
I was going to say the same thing. You have to be defiant.
Sure.
That is like for the young people in the room. I'm a bicyclist. I had been a bicyclist in my 20s, and my parents were embarrassed because adults did not ride bicycles. In those days, they didn't. It was not a thing. And riding a bicycle as an adult at that time meant that you had a DUI.
Oh.
That's what they thought everyone would think. Because adults got a car.
Sure.
And I was like, I like riding, you know, and that you have to, like, I'm sure someone at some point told your grandfather, you know, don't you think you should slow down? And he said no. So you just have to keep going.
Sure. I agree. Don't sit down. Don't sit still too long.
Are there any studies on like an international scale similar to the studies that you look at in the States? I'm kind of specifically referring to Japan, yeah. So I've studied abroad in Japan 3 times, and I've been amazed every single time about like the elder population in Japan, which is becoming increasingly comprised of those folks, and they can do way more stuff than I can.
Sure.
And like my host family this past summer, for example, go mountain climbing at least 4 times a year, on top of like regular exercise. I was interested if you had seen any other like certain like nations' trends of how their elder populations.
Absolutely. Most nations are more physically active than the United States. And I'll just go ahead and say that. And I think that carries over through our younger years all the way up through our older years. Not all nations, I want to be very clear, but most nations are more physically active. And I think that carries over into health as well. When we talk about exercise sort of as medicine, that's an initiative on campus. Did you guys know that? Exercise is medicine. Michaela can answer all of your questions if you're interested. Come to the Hyper 311 on the 20th at 5 p.m. That's my shameless plug for Michaela. She can thank me later. Yeah, so yes, there are differences. I know there are differences 100%. Thanks, ladies. I appreciate it. And I recognize that that's really not my area of expertise. I'll just go ahead and own up to it. Okay, but there are differences we know.
At what age, you mentioned the 1% annual decline in muscle mass and strength.
When does that roughly begin?
40.
Okay.
And I say that with a level of dissent because I turned 40 this year, okay? It doesn't have to happen, and these are cross-sectional studies, okay? These are cross-sectional studies. So keep in mind that doesn't happen for an individual, but for a population by and large, we start to see some of those negative deleterious changes in muscle mass specifically at about 40 years of age, and then muscular strength is not far behind that. Okay, and it's important to have both of those, an adequate amount of muscular strength and an adequate amount of muscle mass. Question, first question.
What do you believe the biggest barrier between the older population and someone that would start a program for exercising the elderly is?
So say that one more time. The barrier for whom? For the person that's exercising?
Well, okay. Since we don't have many of those programs, do you think it's because of the lack of communication, the lack of ability to reach out to that population, or what do you think that barrier is as to why we don't even have those programs?
That's a great question. We do have some of those programs.
Okay.
They do exist. There's a wonderful program in the United States called Silver Sneakers, and if you're not familiar with that one, I highly recommend that you become familiar with Silver Sneakers. I don't know everything there is to know about it, but essentially the government will reimburse a gym for allowing you to exercise there, and it's very reasonable for the patron. I think it's like $25 a year. It's very, very reasonable. You just have to seek out those locations. There's several here in Northwest Arkansas. One happens to be the Boys and Girls Club. Here we have the Center for Exercise at Washington Regional, and there's several others that I just can't recall off the top of my head. I think that the way we get that information out to our older adults is very important, because my grandparents, and the one grandpa is in his 90s, my other grandpa's in his 80s, they do not have internet access because of choice. They think it's ridiculous. Why would they have internet? I can just pick up the phone and call you, and you have all the answers. Well, truthfully, I'm Googling it, so, you know. So how we get that information out, I think, is very beneficial. And most of the senior centers that I'm aware of, here in Northwest Arkansas at least, have either fitness classes or some sort of gym related to their facility. Okay. That's a good question, though.
So if you do yoga, you're going to get something that is getting more and more popular in America, and you're getting some resistance training and stretching, but you want to combine it with something aerobic then, right?
I think so, definitely. The reason you want to continue to do aerobic training is really to protect the cardiovascular system, okay? And we want those benefits of the aerobic side of training to hold on as long as we can, okay? Also, it helps to maintain our VO2, and I know VO2 is a weird thing, or acronym, but that helps us perform our activities of daily living. So it really is a balance between the resistive side, I need to be strong enough to do what I need to do or do what I want to do, but also have the breath, the VO2, in order to accomplish those tasks as well. It's a great question. I do think yoga is beautiful. I love it. It's much harder than you think it is if you've never done it before. Hot yoga is crazy. I've never sweat that much in my entire life. But there are lots of resistive type movements in yoga that I was really surprised by. I'm a new practitioner, so I was just ignorant beforehand. But yes, the short answer is yes. Make sure you couple it with some sort of aerobic activity. Thank you.
I was just going to ask, kind of follow up on your comment about the barriers to seasoned individuals either beginning or engaging in. You know, and you mentioned I took a couple of pictures.
Sure,
because
absolutely.
It was very helpful. It talked about quality of life depends on biomedical, socioeconomic, and cultural factors. So I'm sure there's some policy kinds of issues around that. And, you know, people of lower socioeconomic levels, how do they get the information like you talked about? So, you know, maybe those of us that can talk about it, how do we get the word out? And what are you aware of? Are you aware of?
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't have all the answers.
You
Surprise,
don't?
surprise. I don't know how you reach the folks that aren't already attending a senior center or that don't attend OLLI, for example. And I think the folks that attend OLLI, for those of you that don't know, OLLI is the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. It's a beautiful program. I really like it. But I think the folks that attend are in a higher socioeconomic status than the folks that don't attend, for example. But we can certainly go to like the towers. I think that's the inappropriate term for low-income housing here in Northwest Arkansas. We can take programs there. I've done many exercise programs in retirement facilities that were in the chapel, just so you know, because they didn't have a fitness center that was big enough for our exercise classes, number one. The chapel was beautiful because they didn't have pews, they just had chairs, so you just picked them up and moved them wherever you wanted to. And the other thing about the chapel, it was only used a few hours a week, so it was usually open and available for us to utilize. Other than that, I mean, the other side is to be in these retirement communities usually have a higher level of socioeconomic status. So I'm not sure the answer to that question. I think most of us, we should be spreading the word anytime we can. Yeah, absolutely. In your church, in your community. Hang on, I think we have someone from Facebook Live that wants to answer a question.
No, it was actually just me personally.
Oh, never mind, it's just him personally. Yeah, okay.
Well, and I'm wondering too, maybe to piggyback off of that question, how much of it is not reaching out to people, but maybe just actually counteracting like marketing, because it seems like so much of ageism, and also you could extend it to age-related issues, come from these mass marketing tactics that we kind of barrage people with, where beauty companies are marketing like quick fixes for wrinkles, and there's quick fixes for exercise and diet. You know, I mean, and how do you think we can actually start to work around that?
That would be really easy if I had enough money to get on primetime, you know, to create a commercial to get onto primetime TV, right? But unfortunately, this is not a market that's making money. Exercising for older adults is not making money, so it's not like CrossFit or Fitness One or Planet Fitness, and those are the commercials that you see on TV. It's just not the huge market. I don't know of any older adults that are going to CrossFit, to tell you the truth. I don't know that I would recommend it, but we can talk afterwards if you want to. It certainly has its place for sure. But also, folks are intimidated to go into a new facility, myself included, and I know how to use all of the exercise equipment. So if it's a new facility, I'm going to be intimidated, and I'm an exercise physiologist. So I can only imagine someone that didn't grow up in the era of Title IX, right, how they would feel, and they've never been on a treadmill or never lifted weights before, how intimidating that truly can be. So that's why I'm really thankful here that we have places like the Center for Exercise. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Center for Exercise, but it's very reasonable, number one. And number two, it's meant for folks that are a little more seasoned, that are a little more mature. I think you have to be 50 or so to be a member of the Center for Exercise. Also, if you're from further north in Northwest Arkansas, there is the Rogers Adult Wellness Center, which is really reasonable if you're a resident of the city of Rogers. I think that one's more like $25 a year. And their fitness facility is remarkable. It is absolutely remarkable. I wish we had that equipment down here in Fayetteville. We just don't. That's a good point.
I just wanted to say that if you wanted to get that information out to people, if you had classes that you wanted them to attend, that an idea might be to bring the medical establishment into not just having doctors say, you know, you should exercise more, but actually giving them the specific equipment, knowledge of where the classes are and when they're taking place, and, you know, that other people are going, that this is aimed specifically at older people, and that kind of information, because those people, especially the sedentary ones, are going to be going to the doctor. You know, people, as you get older, you want your checkup every year or so, and more so if you're ill and needing of that. And if the doctor said, here's a class, here's a class, here's a class, that might be a way to get the information to people.
I agree with you 100%. I wish we had more medical doctors that were exercise-minded folks. I tell all of my pre-med students that are in exercise science, don't forget where your roots are and don't forget about the little people, so to speak. One of the initiatives with the American College of Sports Medicine is actually exercise as medicine. We are starting exercise medicine on campus with our faculty, staff, and students, so it's everyone all the way up and down. And the point of that is to try to get the medical community a little more in tune to the exercise side of things, and they actually write a prescription for exercise. Because when I go to the doctor, they're not talking to me necessarily about my physical activity. I don't know why. Maybe it's because of my age, or maybe it's because of the way I look, or whatever. But they're not talking to me about physical activity and exercise. So it would be really nice to have those conversations come from the physicians, because those things carry more weight than the conversations from me, a PhD in exercise science. Unfortunately, I should say.
I think the American Academy of Pediatrics has just come out with a mandate or a recommendation that physicians start prescribing an hour of exercise a week for their pediatric patients. Like, they're encouraging them. They're encouraging them to actually write a prescription on, that's like part of it, to give it to the parents for all kids. Those with sensory issue, like all the diagnosis, ADHD, all of this. They're encouraging them to begin with a prescription for exercise before a prescription for medication.
Love it. We'll see how well that takes. Yes, ma'am.
I was interested if there's a difference of, like, noticeable difference between people who prefer to exercise indoors using equipment versus people who are, I guess, more naturalists. They want to get outside, walk, run, cycle, swim, whatever, outside. Is there any difference as far as, like, the benefits you get from exercise?
The short answer is no. The only time it really makes a difference is if you're in a social situation. So exercising with others, regardless, indoors, outdoors, on a court, on an exercise machine, is more beneficial than exercising alone. Because especially for older adults, there's a social aspect that some older adults don't get in their regular life. When I talk about my personal grandparents, my grandpa, the 91-year-old up there on the screen, everyone is gone that's his age. His siblings, his wife, my grandmother, 70-something years, all of his friends that in the farming community, everyone's passed away. So for him, exercising in a group, because of that social interaction, would probably be more beneficial than the exercise itself. Make sense? Okay. The other side is exercise where you will do it. I don't care. Do what you want, do what you love, do what you like, just do something. Okay? Indoors, outdoors, doesn't really matter. For vitamin D exposure, it does. That's another conversation. Any other questions? Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.